this week we're going to be looking at all the political upheaval. Now, I know this is hot topic, and I know it's on the front page of every single newspaper at the moment, but we'll be talking about that, what affects it, how it's going to affect landlords and so on. Also with regards to finding the right time to invest in buy-to-lets. Now, it's pretty hard to pinpoint that. Not everybody has got the crystal ball to go forward and work out the best things, but we'll go over some basic issues that should be addressed. And also with regards to what do you do if your tenant refuses entry to the property? That's probably a conversation I have maybe 3 or 4 times a day with most of the people that I'm speaking to, unfortunately. Also, subsequently, we're going to be doing a head-to-head this week, looking at city versus the suburbs as well. So let's go. Political upheaval, Vanessa. Now, unfortunately, and I shouldn't necessarily say that as bluntly as that, but unfortunately, we're down to 2 people, Truss versus Sunak. It looks like Truss is going to be the likely winner, Vanessa, but do you think this is pulling focus away from perhaps more important issues? Do you think does who gets into power really matter at this point, really?
Well, you're right. It's totally dominating the media. A lot of things have been put on the back burner. I think there was a specific direction of travel with the Renters Reform Bill, which came out just prior to all this political upheaval and chaos. And I think the latest news is that it has been pushed back a little bit. And we've seen this government consultation come out, and certainly reading between the lines, I think there's very much evidence that they realise that they might have gone too far. And, you know, we talk about, excuse me, the pendulum swinging towards tenants' rights. You know, I completely respect tenants' rights, of course, but I think the pendulum has swung too far. And it seems from this government consultation, which I know we've urged everybody to take part in, and we'll urge you again, and we'll put the link on the chat, to actually have your voice heard, because this is an absolute pivotal time for the private rented sector. And, you know, we need to make our voice heard. I don't have much confidence in either of the candidates, to be honest. I think that no government minister has ever given me any confidence that they understand the sector. It's very complex. There's a lot of stakeholders within it, a lot of conflicting parties, and government policy that's been going on for decades, which has caused the problems that are coming home to roost now. So I don't have a choice between the two, to be honest. But what I would like to draw your attention to is that something came out today. So we're writing kind of breaking news territory here.
Breaking news,
yeah,
Vanessa, fantastic.
Like yeah. I'm just going to read it to you. It's from a publication called Letting Agent Today, which actually has quite a few different streams. There's one called Landlord Today, one called Property Investor Today. I do recommend them. They're good sources of information. And they are saying that a prominent Welsh Conservative politician has called for a reform of the strict measures imposed on the private rental sector in Wales in a bid to boost supply. And Janet Finch-Saunders, who's a member of the Welsh Parliament and Shadow Minister for the Responsibility of Housing, she's called for reform of the Rent Smart Wales package, because she says that landlords in Wales are leaving the sector and it's causing an acute shortage of houses to rent across the nation. Now, this is music to my ears. Here's somebody that has realised that imposing more and more legislation and regulation on landlords, it's going to affect landlords, but ultimately it's going to affect tenants as well.
Absolutely.
And, you know, for those of you that have rental properties in Wales, you'll know that Rent Smart Wales is quite draconian. And a lot of landlords actually don't even know about it. Again, there's a lack of enforcement. And basically, this politician is saying that there's no evidence that it's raised standards or created any kind of better private sector in Wales. And she said, we need evidence because it is actually driving landlords away. Now, I do find this interesting because in my experience, both Wales and Scotland, they can be like kind of petri dishes for kind of testing different policies. And the central government in England often looks to them and sort of sees what they're doing and maybe takes ideas from them. So Rent Smart Wales has been in operation for 8 years now. And I think it's interesting timing that somebody's just finally said, actually, this isn't so great and it needs reviewing and auditing. And I'm hoping that, this could be the penny starting to drop, because it most certainly does need to drop. So very uncertain times ahead for all of us, very difficult to plan. We don't even know who the next prime minister is, what their attitude to housing is going to be. We're kind of all in limbo.
Yeah, it was actually going to be my next question. Surely, if something goes right in in Wales or Scotland, surely the rest of the nation should jump on board. Wouldn't you make sense? It would make sense to just have far more harmony with everything, or far more cohesion.
This is the thing. Everything is so devolved now that each individual country within the United Kingdom has their own housing policy, and it does cause confusion, because somebody, will quite often come on Property Tribes and ask a question, and somebody will answer as if it's English law, and then this person will say, oh, my property's in Scotland. It's an entirely different set of rules. And if you're a landlord that's in England and you're renting, you've bought rental properties in, say, Wales and or Scotland, the same rules that you know from your English buy-to-lets may not apply. So you have to have a whole extra level of knowledge about the policies within that individual country. And certainly Rent Smart Wales has had a lot of pushback from Welsh landlords. They don't like it, they don't think it works, and it seems that this Tory politician has started to ring alarm bells about it. So this is good news to me.
Exceptionally good news. They're really good. So I think what we'll probably do is we'll pin not only the feedback form that Vanessa was mentioning a moment ago on the Facebook community page, but along with that article, I think if it's a hot topic like that, we should be the first ones to get involved. I think certainly. One of the things that I was reading earlier on news, and this is not so much breaking news per se, but it's a continuous conversation, is with regards to the energy crisis. Now, I don't really know what I'm going to do later on this year. As we get closer and closer to the biggest, the big C word, Christmas. I know I shouldn't be saying it when it's 34 degrees outside, but it does get closer and closer. But by which time my energy bills would have gone through the roof. Now, can I or the tenants of the world, they're going to struggle, I think. So I saw here, so an independent analysis to business in the energy market are predicting that a price cap rise of up to 81% in October, with a subsequent rise of an additional 19% due in 2023. Now, this is nasty. This is really nasty now. So many people are going to be struggling to pay these bills. What would be wonderful, I mean, Vanessa, has anyone reached out to you and sort of tenant-wise and said that they are worried about this? Are they struggling? What's the sort of whispering within the tenant community at the minute? Do you know?
Well, I'm not so active within the tenant community, more obviously within the landlord community, being co-founder of Property Tribes and obviously being a landlord myself since 1992 for my sins. But I think there is a huge concern amongst landlords about this, rising crisis. You've got landlords who obviously have rents included, like HMO landlords and holiday let landlords who have utilities included, and then you have other landlords who don't include the utilities in the rent, and the tenant is responsible for the rent. In either case, I don't believe that you can be sticking your head in the sand and ignoring this problem, because if the tenant is responsible for the utilities and they go up dramatically, then the tenant may struggle to afford their rent. And obviously, if you have bills included in an HMO type scenario and those bills are going to go up, then your margins are going to be very significantly slimmed. So now is not a time just to think, oh, well, I'll deal with it when it comes to trouble me. You actually need to be really proactive right now. If you don't include bills in your rent, I think it would be responsible and good practice or best practice to contact your tenant, ask their views on how they're going to cope. Are they going to struggle? And I would strongly recommend that you give them some advice to help them budget with their utilities. And I draw reference to the Energy Saving Trust website, which has a lot of resources on it, which you can direct your tenant to help them manage their energy consumption. And I think that that is a responsible, ethical and best practice thing to do. And I think that communication with the tenant prior to this actually developing into a serious problem, it is a good thing to do. It shows that you're human, that you care, that you're approachable, that you want to work with them if they're struggling.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Vanessa, beg your pardon.
No, I was just going to say, and if you've got HMOs or holiday lets, then you need to be looking at your properties in some depth. You need to be proactive in putting in energy saving measures, such as maybe a smart thermostat, changing to LED light bulbs. Maybe if it's an elderly boiler, now's a good time to buy a new boiler. They are so much more efficient. I've just changed the boiler in my own home. It's 20 years old. It still worked, but the new boiler is, like I was told by the contractor, is probably about 40–50% more efficient than my old built boiler. So this is, you know, it's kind of to excuse the pun, it's mending the roof while the sun is shining. Right now we're in 30+ degrees. It's summer. Everybody's got this happy vibe. It's the summer holidays, but when the winter comes, we may start experiencing energy cuts and all sorts of issues like that. You're going to wish that you took action previously to that happening. So just be really proactive, see what's coming down the pipe, and do everything you can to mitigate the risk that that's going to present to you. You know, and we know that in property, and I do bang this drum, so forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but in property, you know, prevention is always less expensive, less emotional heartache than cure. Once you go into, sorry, yes, that's right, I got it right.
That's the right way around.
Yeah. You know, when you try and cure something in property, it's already gone wrong, and things can, you know, spiral down very quickly in property and become more and more expensive. So part of actually what these webinars are for, and why I'm so pleased to be part of them, is that we want to move you from cure mode into prevention mode, because if you're in prevention mode, you're going to have a much more peaceful landlord life, and you'll be able to deal with any issues that do arise because you've gone into prevention mode, and you're being proactive rather than waiting for something to go wrong and then go, you know, I'm in trouble, what am I going to do? So yeah, we all got into this to have a peaceful life and sleep at night. So for, you know, what Matt said, for $2.99 a year, it's a bit of a no-brainer to me. And I think going forwards, when we know that people are going to be potentially struggling with their rental payments because of the energy crisis and cost of living, that everybody should go this afternoon and take out rent guarantee insurance.
And just to quickly touch on that as well, the cost of things going up for landlords as well. Looking at buildings insurance generally, we're in a very stable market at the moment. Price increases this year compared to last are not that much. So you're not going to be hit by a hefty increase in your buildings cover. So if there is that spare cash to protect yourself, rent guarantee is definitely something that you should be looking at.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Before we move on any further, Vanessa, we've got a question here from Jen. Firstly, Jen is loving the content, as always. Is your boiler a hydrogen boiler, Vanessa, that you've just purchased?
No, it's not. It's just a regular gas boiler.
Okay.
But it's a good question. There are moves afoot, as we know, to phase out gas boilers. I wouldn't be surprised if it's put back again. it's certainly not something that's particularly of concern to me. But you know, it is good if you're going to change a boiler. My advice is to get an A+ rated boiler. For a few, you know, extra pounds, you get a much more energy efficient boiler, and this is going to help your property and your tenants. And we know that energy efficiency is really rising up the priority list of tenants. And whereas before they would never even think about energy bills and how much it's going to cost to run a property, we know that that's right at the top of their list now. So it's important, if you are going to change a boiler, you're only going to do it once every 20 years, change it for an A+ rated boiler.
Absolutely.
Future-proofing.
Future-proofing is the one. Now, with that being said, it actually leads us on to a bit of our next topic, really, which is now the right time to invest into buy-to-let? Now, obviously, we're touching and I think we will continue to talk about the cost of living crisis because it is so severe and so hot topic at the moment. But is right now a good time to be investing and growing your portfolio? So the reason mainly that we have this discussion day in, day out with our landlords is that we're now at 1.75%. We saw an increase of 0.5% last Thursday for the interest rates. Now, that's obviously going to affect mortgages. Now, at the beginning of this year, I was talking to lots of landlords who are on variable rates, and it wasn't necessarily in the forefront of their mind to be talking. Fast forward a few months later, those same people are coming to us now and saying, yeah, can I start looking at things that are going to be fixed because it's a bit of a turbulent time right now. So what do you think, Vanessa? Are we about where we're going? Do you think we're going to have more interest rate increase? If you do have that crystal ball, Vanessa, let me have it as well. That'd be fantastic. But what's your opinion on what's happening at the minute?
Well, I have quite strong views on this topic, and I will say it's born out of being a landlord since 1992, and property has always served me well. It's given me a nice, comfortable lifestyle and allows me to do the things that I want to do when I want to do them. And that's a happy life for anybody. So I am speaking through that lens. I am a confirmed propertyaholic. So bear that in mind when you hear my view. But my view is this: the only time that any of us have to do anything is now, today. That's the only time that we can take action. So unless you're Doctor Who with a TARDIS, you can't go back into the past and buy property as much as we might like to, and you can't go into the future and buy property. So the only time that any of us have to act is now. And I think one of the most wonderful things about property is that time is your friend, because time is going to pass. And generally speaking, if you buy correctly over a long time frame, your asset value is going to increase. But in order to benefit from that, you actually have to have some property. So it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. So if you have done your due diligence and you've discussed it with your partner, if they're involved or they're going to be involved, and you have a very strong reason to do this, such as you want to leave a legacy for your children, or you want to have a pension hedge, if you've got those things in place, then my advice is take action today, because you can take action based on what you know today and what products are out there to help you move forwards. I'll give you a very good example of why I subscribe to this. Back in 2006, I was able to purchase a property, a 4-bedroomed house in High Wycombe, and there was a mortgage product that allowed what was known at the time, and still is, but they don't exist anymore, a 10% gifted deposit. Now, I was able to negotiate a 10% discount off the price of this 4-bedroomed house. And I also negotiated stamp duty paid. So I essentially bought this property in 2006 for 330,000 without putting a deposit in. and without paying the stamp duty because the developer paid it. It was a new build house. That house is now worth nearly 600,000. Now, I had a friend who liked the sound of this, and I said, look, jump in, there's a couple of units left. I'm sure you'd be able to get the same deal as me. Here's the mortgage product, go fill your boots. And my friend was like, and he waited a few days, and then he said, okay, I'm going to do it. And the product had gone. So I just wish I'd bought 2 or 3, to be honest. I don't know why I didn't. I'm very risk averse, as I keep saying. So it was a big house. It's actually bigger than the house I live in myself. But this is an example. You act with what you've got and what's out there. So I can only think that rates are going to go up. So the lenders are pulling products all the time. They're adding new products all the time. I'm currently doing 2 remortgages, and one of mine was pulled before I had the chance to move forward with it, and I've had to go on to a slightly higher rate. So I think if you get educated, you get motivated, and you take action, and if you commit to something 100% and immerse yourself fully in it, I think you will make a success of it, no matter what goes on around. And we're going into a very, very inflationary environment. And as we stated before, that really does favour people that hold cash flowing assets during this period. And, you know, there's a lot of positive impacts of inflation on being a landlord. So it's not all doom and gloom out there for sure. And I remain positive. And we've got rents, you know, at an absolute all-time high. Can I just tell you something, George, before we move on?
Yeah.
A journalist from the Financial Times rang me earlier this week for a comment. And she said, oh, we're writing an article about landlords putting up rents everywhere all the time and how ridiculous it's getting. And I said, with respect, landlords don't just put up rents, okay? I said, the rent is controlled by the market forces, supply and demand. If the market doesn't support a higher rent, that landlord can put it on at a higher rent, but they won't get it. It's actually the market that determines rents, not landlords. And right now, we've got a real bad supply-demand imbalance, and there's scores of applicants for literally every property that comes on the market. In fact, we've had one comment on Property Tribes this week. It's a Newcastle landlord. She was getting around $450 a month for sort of 100K type houses. Her rents have gone up to 635 in the last couple of months. I think she's worked it out. It's the 35% increase. Now, this is quite scary because I'm not sure how sustainable that is. And also, I don't believe that universal credit or LHA housing element is going to keep pace with inflation, which could be a risk for landlords as well. But, you know, whilst there's all doom and gloom out there, don't listen to the Daily Telegraph, listen to Mashroom, and you'll get the correct information to help you succeed.
It's really interesting that, because you've always got to look at both sides of the fence, obviously. So you'd be purchasing a property at X, and I always have conversations with people of, okay, so how much should I rent out the property for? Well, it's quite a wide umbrella, that answer, because only you know what you purchased it for and what your outgoings are, perhaps your mortgage. You know what you need to return to actually make it a financially viable investment. Perhaps it's your part of your income. Maybe you have X amount of properties and it's part of your income, and you need to have X amount of money to survive every single month, or whatever it may be. But you've then got to look at it the other side, as you rightly said, of, well, it's all very well you wanting 6% or whatever at 4%, whatever it is. But if the tenant, if it's not like that in the area, or the tenant can't afford to pay that, then you may have to drop it. Or subsequently, if there's a supply and demand issue, you've got to maybe increase it. There's so many variables. It's no one size fits all. But one of the things, in fact, I've got a sticky note on my screen, and I have done for a very long time now, but it states the best time to have bought property was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now.
Well, exactly. And right now is all we've got. And any of us, we don't know what's going to happen to us tomorrow. My husband is out in Ukraine at the moment, helping with the humanitarian and pet rescue issue, because we've got 3 critters like this fellow here. And you know, it's terrible what happened to him. He's okay, but their convoy was targeted by the Russians, by a Russian drone, and they had missiles directed at them, and he's been hit by shrapnel. He was wearing a bulletproof vest and helmet, etc., and he's absolutely fine, but he was terrified. He said it was absolutely so scary to hear these rockets coming in. So none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. We can only act today and set things in place for the future today. And that's why people that sit on the fence, you know, I urge them to jump, but jump with caution, understand what you're doing, get your advice from the right places, and, you know, dive in. The water's lovely. And if you get the right support around you, the right insurance, the right mortgage product, you should be okay. Indeed, we had a landlord come on to Property Tribes, I think it was yesterday, saying that they have bought their first buy-to-let, they've got a repayment mortgage, and after all expenses, it is actually slightly cash flow negative. But they have very significant other income and they weren't bothered about that. And this is actually what I love about property. You can just customize it to be whatever is right for you, your personal situation, your attitude to risk, you know, what your life goals are. As George said, it's not one size fits all. And I think it's really helpful to be part of this community where we're always discussing these things, and then you can take away all this information and apply it to yourself and come up with what's right for you. And that's so important, because what I'm doing may not be right for you in your circumstances. I've got different circumstances to you. So make it very personal and bespoke to you and your situation, and enjoy. It's a great thing to be part of.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a couple of questions on here, Vanessa, with regards to mortgages. I'm just trying to make sure I get the right end of the stick of this question from Charlie here. Would it be worth remortgaging and to put your money into a new buy-to-let property, and then in turn the mortgage on my house I would remortgage? I think that's what Charlie's asking here. But then subsequently, will that price go up? If I've got the right end of the stick, Charlie, you're saying remortgage your current property and take advantage of any rates that are available right now rather than waiting, and then in turn purchasing a new buy-to-let property. So I think we've already got Vanessa's answer there is yes, jump on board and go for the ride. But in turn, if you borrow more, then naturally your payments would be more subsequently per month. I think that
you've got to, you know, property is a numbers game. The numbers will never lie to you. You've got to run them. Now, one thing that I'm a big advocate of is I have 2 lodgers in my home. If you've got a spare room in your property, it's such a great income stream. My 2 lodgers bring in $12.50 a month, which is more than double the mortgage on my own home.
Don't say that too loud, Vanessa. Don't say it too loud.
I know
they'll hear you.
They're not here. But yeah, no, I mean, this is my point, that you also benefit from the government rent a room allowance, which is £7,500 income tax-free per annum. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a spare room sitting there, then I would highly recommend that you rent it out, get an additional income stream. It could actually fund additional equity release on your own home. It could help your own utility bills. It could go into a savings pot for your next buy-to-let deposit. I mean, I personally sweat every single asset we have, even my cats. They are actor cats and they get paid to be on films and advertisements. And my husband says that I will rent out anything that's not bolted down, including him. So you've got to think, what have I got in my life? How can I make it work harder for me? On Mashroom, there's some software you can use to work out the performance of your portfolio, make sure that you're optimizing it, see where there's capital raising opportunities that maybe you could get another property. You need to be actively having these little thought processes literally every day if you're looking to grow and be successful as a landlord.
The next point that we wanted to talk about today, which is one unfortunately we discuss quite a lot with our landlords, is refusal of entry. Okay. So as a landlord, you've got your responsibilities as naturally we've covered already today, but you've got to get in and do the gas safety certificate or EICR, EPC, or whatever it may be. Okay. Sometimes you just want to check in, say hello, make sure everything's all right, and be the honourable landlord that you are. What happens if your tenant decides no, you're not coming in? Vanessa, what about that? Just that point blank, nope, you're not coming in.
Well, we did cover this in the recent tax compliance, sorry, not tax compliance. We did cover this in the recent compliance webinar in quite some depth. And I would refer you to that. It's on the Mashroom YouTube channel. And I would recommend that you go and subscribe to that and hit the notifications bell so you can get updates from Mashroom as and when we post new content, because we actually do post all these videos after the event as well, so you can rewatch them. So we already have covered this in some depth. I'm mindful of the time because we want to squash in a load more stuff, so I'm going to answer it very quickly. Basically, your tenant has the right of what is known as quiet enjoyment of their property. That means that if you as a landlord want to do something at the property, you have to give them 48 hours in notice in writing to gain access to the property. Now, the tenant is quite within their rights to decline that. And there are many legitimate reasons why they would, such as maybe they've had a new baby, maybe they're dealing with some kind of family crisis, maybe they're a shift worker, maybe they're, I don't know, you know, they've got some genuine reason why. I mean, during COVID, obviously shielding from COVID. So that's fine. If there's a legitimate reason, okay. Obviously, there are tenants that have nefarious reasons, shall we say, for not allowing access. It could be that they've got an unauthorized pet, or they're subletting the rooms, or they're growing cannabis, or something like that. So when a tenant refuses access, I think it's very important to understand why. Now, from a legal perspective, as long as you can prove in writing, oh, sorry, I thought I'd made this silent. As long as you can prove in writing that, as long as you can prove in writing that you've contacted the tenant, that you've made numerous attempts to contact them, you're covered essentially. Now, if you know they're refusing gas safety, EPC, whatever it might be, viewings or whatever, they're perfectly entitled to refuse viewings if the property is up for relet. And indeed, if a lot of landlords say, oh, but in my tenancy agreement, it says that they've got to allow for viewings when they're going to move out. No, that's not enforceable. And what I do when I am reletting a property, I incentivize the tenant financially to allow viewings, because if they're involved in the process and they have a financial incentive, they're probably going to be more amenable. They're going to keep the property clean. It's going to look better when it's shown. So just be sure to document all your attempts to gain access to the property. In very extreme cases, you can take out an injunction to gain access, but you know that's quite draconian. You could self-report yourself to the local authority and they would order the tenant to allow a trades in. So again, rather extreme. My advice is just to document all your attempts to get into the property, to do the repairs, maintenance, compliance, whatever it is, and then say to your tenant, you know, you have refused continually, I've documented it, so I can't do whatever it is that needs to be done, and it's your fault that I can't. So that's the legal view on it. Anne's asked very good questions. Sorry, I think
and this is, I think this is a beautiful lead up into the next part of the webinar, really, the closing part of the webinar. Sorry, Vanessa, but yeah, it was the question I was going to answer as well.
Yeah, just again, Anne's saying, is it better to have a few smaller properties to rent or one larger property, say a 3-bedroom? I love this topic, Anne, because it's all based about risk. If you spread your risk, it can be lesser risk. But then by the same token, I always say this, a low value property costs the same to run as a high value property. So if you're getting £300 a month rent and you need a new boiler in a 100 grand property, you know, that's going to wipe out your rental income for months, if you think about it. Whereas if you had a higher value property, a £400,000 property, and you need a new boiler, and that was bringing in maybe £2,000 a month rent, it would pay for the boiler in 1 month. So this is an interesting topic. Right now, I think risks are amplified because of Brexit, because of COVID, because of political upheaval, because of inflation, because of the Ukraine-Russian war and the impact that it's going to have on supply chains, or is indeed having on energy supply. So my current feeling is it's quality, not quantity, because quality properties are more robust in times of economic turbulence. So I would probably go for a 3-bed with a garden and with a drive. We're seeing a huge advent of electric cars, and people want a drive where they can charge their electric car. So again, future-proofing.
Absolutely. Subsequently as well, based on Anne's question there, is unless you're exceptionally good at admin, you've just got 3 times as much work to do, 3 times as many tenants to deal with, and 3 times as many check-in and check-outs to do, and 3 times as many dates that you need to think about. So as much as that shouldn't put you off per se, it's just realizing that fact. And but I think it also goes back down to the things that we spoke about a minute ago, is that only you know how much of money that you need to bring in, how much money you have to pay out on mortgages and so forth. So I think break it down. Not one rule is better than the next, but it brings us on to the next topic, the thing you just mentioned about the 3-bedroom home and the driveway for charging your car and so forth. So the last part, wrapping up for this week's webinar, is cities versus suburban. Now, my opinion on this, Vanessa, is that inner city places are still attractive and still very good, and where a lot of people want to live, but not everybody has the ability to bring up a family in a 1-bedroom flat in Hackney. So what we're finding is that more and more people, both purchasing their own residential home, looking to rent and so forth, they're looking at these commuter belt towns, somewhere that they could maybe turn one of the bedrooms into a home office, maybe where they can extend their family and so forth. But I mean, what's your opinion? Where do you think the hottest trends are going to be? Despite what I just said, what do you think the hottest trends are? Cities or suburbs? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I like what you said, George, and I concur. I think there's something to be said for both of them. And it's good in property to have an open mind and not be too entrenched in your points of view. And this is what I love about forums and learning new stuff every day, is that, you know, people challenge my entrenched point of view. And then I think, actually, maybe they have got a point. I need to have a rethink about that. So I can be quite dogmatic in my opinion. And over the years, I've learned that it's very good to listen to people that actually don't agree with you, because they really test your opinion and make you review it and think about it. And maybe you need to change it a little bit, because we're in a very fluid environment. So I think there's something to be said for both. George, you hinted at where you could potentially get the answer, and that is to find the demand before you create the supply. And this is my top tip for landlords, particularly newbies. Don't create a supply and then hope some tenant's going to come knocking. No, you find out the tenant demand first. So if you're looking in a city, I think 1- and 2-bed flats are pretty bulletproof. We're seeing the return of the pied-à-terre, where people are either looking to rent or buy 1- and 2-bed flats, so they've got somewhere to be when they're in the city, the 2 or 3 days that they're in the office. So I think that's going to actually underpin 1- and 2-bed city apartments. And they are popular. People have a certain lifestyle where you can go to the theatre, you can go to restaurants, you can go to bars. So my advice is, if you buy in a city, buy within a 5 to 10 minute walk of a transport link, preferably tube station, and within a 5 to 10 minute walk of buying a pint of milk. Those are my 2 top tips for buying in the city. In the suburbs, you're probably going to think about more family homes. I think the bread and butter of the private renters sector, the landlord's favourite, the low risk opportunity is 2 and 3 bed family homes in a nice area, in a good school catchment area with good transport links, maybe some open park space nearby, good leisure amenities. Those kind of tenants that go into those type of properties, they will probably stay for between 5 and 7 years. So you'll have a very long-standing tenant in there, very few turnover costs. Whereas perhaps in the city, you may experience a little bit more of a turnover because people are more transient and people are moving for work and things like that. But I'm going to sit on the fence here, George, and say I think there's reasons and opportunity for both. You need to do your research. You need to speak to local agents about tenant demand. You can go onto the Mashroom Facebook group, Property Tribes, and ask, does anybody know what tenant demand is like in this area? So do your research, and that will help shape your decision. So that in this case, I don't really believe that there's a right or wrong answer. I think there's reasons to have accommodation in both cities and in the suburbs.
I think one thing to highlight here is that you're absolutely right. I want to sit on the fence as well. I'm glad that you said it, so I can join you on that fence, Vanessa. But also perhaps looking at properties that a lot of the hard work has been done for you. So for example, a property in the suburbs that does have an electric charger for your car already fitted is going to be far more attractive than you needing to mess about with it as well. And having that foresight that you can just walk straight into that property and advertise it as somewhere attractive for people with electric cars and so forth. More and more extensions are being built for at-home workers. Properties that already have that involved, all the way down to the tiny minute details, making sure there's Ethernet ports in all the rooms. So if you do need to transfer and make it into a 2-bedroom flat in the middle of Manchester, but it's really what you're really targeting is the professional singleton who wants to work from home, making sure everything's set up. So I think it goes further than just cities and suburbs. It's what everything that combines with your property as well.
Very much so.
Yeah,
definitely. I've just seen a question here. Which would you rather do, rent to rent or buy to let? I'm glad this question has been raised by Case, because I think it's really important to understand that rent to rent, you don't own any assets. You are taking control of somebody else's asset and they can take it back at a drop of the hat. And you might say, oh, well, I've got a legal document. Well, good luck to you trying to enforce that, because costs and legal costs are very significant. Why would you build your business on something that you could be taken away from you just with no notice? We do hear of this happening. It's rent to rent is a strategy that's designed to sell expensive training courses. I don't recommend it at all. There are a lot of pitfalls. You're actually not investing in anything except hope that the landlord doesn't take the property back. It's not a sustainable business. And if you're of limited funds, you're actually in no position to claim that you can guarantee the rent. So I would steer well clear of rent to rent unless you go and get proper advice and proper training and understand the correct legal documents that you need and the compliance you need in order to be a rent to renter. Do not go on one of these guru training courses. You won't get the information that you need. So buy to let, you own the asset, you control the asset, you're in it for the long term, and it's going to serve you well. And if you're looking for capital growth or you're not bothered about capital growth, then focus on cash flow. That's where it's at.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a couple of weeks ago. Again, maybe a couple of webinars ago, and I think mainly the consensus that came from is that none of us deny that you can make money from rent to rent. Okay, you can. We don't deny that, but it's not for everybody. And the way it's been positioned and pitched in the market is that anybody can do this. Every man and his dog can do rent to rent, where it just isn't the case. And paying these courses of 10, 20,000 pounds in some instances does not make you a professional, nor does it make you an overnight millionaire in the sector. So absolutely, there is money to be made in rent to rent. There's money to be made in lots of things in the world, but it isn't for everybody. So and again, Vanessa is rather biased in the buy-to-let market. So buy-to-let is the answer for that one. Big thumbs up.
And I just think that, you know, in turbulent times, which I think we are going to be going through, and not to say we haven't been through them already over the last few years, but it's really powerful to hold assets. And assets help you, they give you choice, they give you flexibility. You can utilize them in different ways. We've touched on that a little bit today, in fact. So you might have a property that's currently a buy-to-let and you think, actually, you know, my tax bill's gone up a lot. This is in a good area. I could rent it out as a holiday let. So you could potentially achieve approximately 4 times what the monthly rent would achieve by holiday letting. So, you know, there's so much to be said for, you know, getting assets. And even if you can't afford your own home, if you have one way to get on the property ladder is to actually start out with a buy-to-let. Yes, the deposit is bigger, but it's much more based on the rent that the borrow. Yes, it's much more based on how much borrowing the rent will support than it is on your personal circumstances. So buy-to-let might be an avenue that's open to you, whereas a residential mortgage is currently closed to you. So, you know, this is why it's so important to get educated and see all the different possibilities out there. There will be a way forward for you. If you're determined, if you've got, you know, you're willing to make sacrifices, you will find a way forward. And there's lots of options out there.
You still own a tangible asset. I think the best way of looking at it, if it all went wrong one day and you needed to sell out, you do have the ability to do it. Whereas with rent to rent, unfortunately, and other of these other property schemes, it's very much sort of like, well, you can't sell your idea, unfortunately. You can't sell your marketing material. It's the asset in which you have. And one quick question here. We've got a question that we've got a shared ownership in my property and I want to purchase a buy-to-let. What is the best way to move forward? We get actually asked this question quite a lot with people who have purchased a home and then a few years later they're wanting to purchase a buy-to-let. At this stage, you need to find out what conditions are within your shared ownership. I believe you need to find out if you're allowed to purchase a second home within the shared ownership scheme, I think is the first question that you'll need to ask.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, I think it's more of a cost thing. You have to work out that if you're able to afford the subsequent mortgage on top of your shared ownership and so forth. I think finances come full circle with most of these questions. But we do have one more, which could probably be a webinar on its own, if I'm honest, Vanessa. We have touched on it before, but it's the age-old Airbnb versus renting as well. Do you want to give a couple of sentences on that, Vanessa?
Well, you know, it's like comparing an apple to an orange. We could do a whole webinar on it, so I'll keep it short. You know, there's pros and cons for both, which is, sorry, a bit of a lame answer, but you need to identify the pros and cons of both. I do actually have a thread on Property Tribes where I've laid out the pros and cons of holiday lets and short-term rentals versus standard buy-to-let. I think a key thing to understand is that with buy-to-lets, you're dealing with tenants. With Airbnb and holiday lets and short-term rentals, you're dealing with guests. It's a completely different arena, a different sector, a different mentality. You are acting more in the capacity of a hotelier, and it's very different. Now, I think the way to go forward with this is, my advice is to build a solid cash flowing portfolio of single occupancy buy-to-let once you've got your cash flow coming in, your net month-on-month cash flow, then's the time to start thinking about diversifying. It hedges your risk, gives you other additional, perhaps even higher yielding income streams, which could potentially be slightly higher risk, because obviously if you don't have any guests, you're still paying the mortgage. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for both, but my advice is to start out with buy-to-let, hone your landlord skills there, and then think about diversifying, you know, maybe into holiday lets, maybe into HMOs, but get the experience first.
Fantastic. Well, that's about it for another webinar. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for your time and wisdom. It's wonderful.